Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Lillah Schwartz. Lillah Schwartz is the author of Healing Our Backs with Yoga, as well as 4 therapeutic yoga classes on Yoga U online platform. You can find out more about Lillah Schwartz and her wonderful work at yogawithlillah.com. Welcome, Lillah Schwartz.
Hi, Catherine. Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I feel very honored to be with you.
Now, for our audience, many of us in natural healing have really embraced yoga. I've now taught yoga for 25 years. Even though my main work is a medical intuitive healer, I still teach 6 yoga classes and 1 Qigong class every week. And Lillah Schwartz has taught yoga for 40 years. So Lillah Schwartz, so many people like yoga and love yoga. And, some of us use yoga therapeutically. What is so special about yoga for back care?
Well, yoga is a very special form of movement because yoga includes sort of that, it's very inclusive. So it's not just muscular, it's neuromuscular. And it's not just neuromuscular, it affects the fascia. And it doesn't just affect the fascia, it affects the emotional body, it affects the mental body. So we have to start with the assumption and the understanding, which of course years ago when I first started didn't really exist in the culture, but now it does, and that is it's a mind-body system. It's not just a body system, it's a mind-body system. And so the nature of yoga and how it helps to move in different patterns and move more deeply into your personal connection with yourself. And that's really the helpful part of yoga. As far as using yoga for back pain, there's a lot of yoga being taught, and not all of it is good for back pain. So when I was 16, I fell off a horse, busted my tailbone, sat on a whoopee cushion for about 2 weeks, rearranged my sacrum and my pelvis, and that gave me the gift of back pain. So it wasn't just lumbar pain, it was mid-back pain, and it was neck and shoulders. So everything kind of gets involved when the base of the body, which is the pelvis, is out of whack. So, I was looking for ways to heal and relieve my pain, and I did discover yoga. And in the discovery of yoga, yes, it does help us feel better because we're stretching and opening and learning to balance a sequence or balance a routine so that it makes anatomical sense. And in making anatomical sense, we can then balance the muscle structure around the joints. So that's a primary way that yoga does help. And it requires some understanding. It requires that people think about their anatomy a little bit, think about their practice. What does it feel like to go down the right path if they're trying to care for their backs?
Right. Now, Lillah Schwartz, you got to yoga from your personal experience of falling off a horse. What other modalities did you try to heal your back pain before you kind of realized that yoga was the way that you needed to get rid of it?
Well, Catherine, it's an interesting question that you ask me, because when I was, of course, younger. So by the time I came to yoga, I was 28 by the time I came to yoga. And I came to yoga to handle the angst, or the angst, if you would, of being a young adult and trying to find my way in life. And so I came to yoga as a healing path to also help my mind body be more settled, right? As a healing journey. And it wasn't until I was doing yoga for about 5 or 6 years that the imbalances in my body really came to the surface, and the back pain really kicked in big time. Back pain, hip pain, and knee pain. So it kicked in at some point. And then, of course, anytime we come up against our suffering, we have to start asking more questions. What am I doing? What might I do to help myself, and how am I going to find out? So it was at that point that I discovered the Iyengar method of yoga. And he was a world-renowned yoga master. I studied in the method for about 30 years. But I also had a background in anatomy and physiology. So I kind of brought my understanding of anatomy and physiology into my yoga practice. And what I realized in the way that the Iyengar method was being taught at the time is that it really did appeal and satisfy anatomical principles. Now, at that point, I had to start putting together my own sequences that really helped my specific condition to heal my back. So he had his ways and I had my ways.
There you go. Absolutely. And I do feel that often our injuries can become our greatest teachers, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, yoga with Lillah expert, what is idiopathic back pain?
Okay, so this is really interesting. So idiopathic back pain is a kind of back pain where you can run as many tests as you want and nothing turns up positive. We don't know why you have back pain. It's all in your mind. Now, you and I know it's not all in the mind, nor is it just all in the body. There's always a meeting place of the mind and the body. So in that idiopathic back pain, a person really doesn't get any real support from going to the medical community and being tested, or and maybe some support from physical therapy. But they've done some testing with this, and so there's a combination of things. One is that the fascia, one of the things to understand about the body is how the fascia works. And there's a lot of research now that's showing a deeper understanding of fascia. So the fascia is connective tissue. It connects everything. It surrounds everything. It's 20% of your body weight. So if I weigh 110 pounds, 20 pounds of me is fascia. So that's an interesting example about how much connective tissue there really is. And so it surrounds bones and muscles and groups of muscles and regions of the body. And it forms what's called, Thomas Myers in his work with anatomy trains has demonstrated, and the Rolf work with Ida Rolf has demonstrated that the body is really a tensegrity system. So what that means is that if I reach my arm out and I roll it in, I may think I'm just doing it to this arm, but I'm actually doing it to the opposite shoulder as well. So there's a way in which the body connects with the fascia that's really remarkable. Now, the fascia itself, some of the new research shows that the motor neurons are not located in the muscles, which everyone thinks, oh, it's my muscles that contract and that's what makes my body move. And the truth is that the motor neurons are located in the fascia. So, and the motor neurons in the fascia are connected to our neurological body, therefore our emotional body as well. So moving energy into the body with through the fascia in this way really impacts the whole system.
Right. And my understanding is that the connective tissue is the only system in the body where every cell is literally connected to every other cell in the body, right?
There is some research that's being done on that with the idea of the piezoelectric properties. It's being studied again. The Germans are doing a lot of really good fascia studies, which is always remarkable. The other thing about fascia is that when we get small micro tears in the fascia, so back to idiopathic back pain, when we get small micro tears in the fascia, what happens is it weakens the fascial structure. And if someone were just to Google fascia in the body and look at how much fascia is in the lower back, it's a whole huge sheath of fascia. And you could have micro tears and not have a herniated disc, but have enough micro tears that it's going to create a sense of alert in the body, because the body's always like, oh, don't bend over like that, it's going to hurt, right? Don't bend like that, it's going to hurt. So we're going to get those signals. So we go to the doctor and they do the test and they say, there's nothing wrong with you. All right, so then you have to come back and you have to say, all right, can I do some kind of exercise? In yoga, there's very specific things to do for that kind of a weakness. And it takes three to 6 months to rebuild the fascia again. So it doesn't happen fast. And that's something that people should keep in mind. So with the idiopathic back pain, there are specific exercises. I have a whole segment in the book that I wrote about progressive spinal extensions. So extensions are like the locust pose, upward facing dog pose, those kinds of poses, Virabhadrasana 1, those are all extension poses. And those are poses that are really good for the lower back, especially in this sort of idiopathic fascial connection kind of scenario, right? So, and then the other thing is to work with breath. A person really has to work with their breath, because some of that tension could be emotional as well as physical, right? So deep breathing, long connected breaths. I have my two favorites. Would you like to hear my two favorites?
Absolutely.
Okay. So my first favorite is inhaling through the nose, long, slow inhales, and exhaling through the mouth. And the idea with that is to take a deep breath, pause, take a deep breath, and let the exhalation be longer than the inhalation, so you kind of release and discharge whatever stress happens to be going on in the moment. So, and repeat it as often as necessary to kind of get yourself stepped down a little bit and a little bit more quiet. And then my second favorite breath is the long, slow inhalation through the mouth and the exhalation through the nose. And because that is the replenishing breath. So if I have some achiness in my lower back, because we're all going to have, it's a management scenario. We all sit in chairs. We all work on computers. It's a management scenario. So every now and then we're going to have some back discomfort. It's just part of the path, right, of being in a body. So when I have some low back discomfort and it's a little tense, maybe I've been at the computer too long, or it was pouring outside and I said, I'm not going to walk today. Oh, okay. Well, then I better do some good yoga, but I can also do some deep breathing. And so that inhalation through the mouth is I can pull the prana in. I can pull the light from outside in the field of my body into my body and fill it back up again. And I find that that's helpful on so many levels, physically and emotionally.
Right. And in my work as a medical intuitive healer, there's a syndrome called cardiac low back. It's identified in a system of healing called TBM. And in a nutshell, your lower back is often, I explain, kind of like the breaker switch in your house. When, when your electric system goes on overload, your electricity goes out sometimes, and your lower back is like that. And it's really, cardiac low back is a symptom of adrenal burnout, right? And still you have to figure out, well, why am I exhausted? Am I exhausted from sitting improperly or working too many hours or emotional stress or what have you? But again, so re-energizing and drawing energy into the system.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And what you said is so true. It's like when we're learning to apply yoga to our life, those kind of questions you just posed, it's like, am I in a state of fatigue? Should I be doing a little bit of restorative yoga? Maybe yes. Maybe you should do a day or two of restorative yoga. Should I do restorative yoga every time I go to the studio or every time I get on my mat? No, because it doesn't, it gives that respite to the nervous system and to the body mind, but it doesn't help stimulate the vitality and the life force that we need to be really strong. And so then you have to go to your asana practice, and it has to be a more directed practice, right? And if you don't mind, I'm going to jump right into what does a person do when they have low back pain and they want to do an asana practice? I'm going to jump right back into that question. So the first thing we always want to do is we want to relieve the discomfort. So in my teaching, and what I've learned is the best over 35 years of helping people with back pain, and people who would start an 8-week class at a 6 or 7 on a 1 to 10 scale, and 8 weeks later be a 2 or a 3. Now that's pretty good results, right? And so how I get that result is I understand gravity. And I ask people to lay down on their back. If your back hurts and you're at the computer, first thing you should do is go lay down on your back on the floor, right? Get neutral. Why? Because when we lay neutral on the floor, gravity helps to decompress the spine and allow it to get longer. So if we're driving our car every day and we get out of bed in the morning, we go and we adjust the rearview mirror up a little bit because we're tall. And at the end of the day, after running around all day long, we get in the car and we adjust the rearview mirror down a little bit because we shrank. And that's something that people can observe in their own life, right? So there's that nature of gravity and action and things tending to compress. The more we sit, the more we compress. The more heavy weights we lift, for the men in our lives, the more heavy weight they lift, the more the disc compresses, right? The more pressure downward. And that same pressure is to be considered with osteoporosis, because you don't want too much pressure, you want just enough to make the bones stronger, right? So with that, you lay down on the floor, let your back lengthen out, do simple things like alternate knee to chest, real simple things that you can do, and just deep breathe and let things neutralize a little bit. And that's always the place to start. And then from there, the stretches are things that extend the limbs. So you need to teach your spine how to remember to extend. So you have to teach the fascia to let go and extend. You have to extend the legs a little bit more. You have to get some extension in the spine. So that's really primary. When you get that extension, you decompress and you take the pressure off the nerves. And so there are ways to do that. And you have to make yourself lift. Take your arms over your head, but then you got to lift. You got to lift your hands out of your ribs, and then you got to lift your ribs out of your hips, and you got to keep going until you've taught your body how to lengthen and extend. Once that's done and the pain has subsided and you have a little better range of motion, so then there's poses that counterbalance each other, and poses that work together as a system, like the hip series. There's a hip series that all the stretches of the hip series are the 7 anatomical movements of the hips. We've got enough knowledge of anatomy. We know how the knees, how the hip turns out, how it rotates in, how the leg flexes, how the leg extends. And then the poses that match those actions are put together and it becomes a hip sequence.
Right. Now, Lillah Schwartz, what are the key principles that a person can follow when they're using yoga to heal the back?
So that's kind of what I'm engaged in right now. What they want to do is create length and space. They want to follow stretches based on an anatomical balance. They want to breathe for certain, they want to breathe, but they have to wait until they've created some length and space and help the muscles to ease out before building a lot of strength. So, you know, a lot of people that I've worked with have, like I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being no pain, 10 we've called 911 because that person's not standing up. If someone comes in and they're a 6, 7, or 8 at the start, then it's going to take them 2 or 3 months to create enough length and space, because chances are their muscles are too hard, too contracted, too much training, overtrained, right? So it's going to take some time to educate the body before you go back to building strength. And then strength is real specific. But strength can be rebuilt and should be rebuilt. Now, in someone who's doing a lot of yoga already, and we know that the yoga that's available out there is a lot of flow. It's a lot of flow, and everybody's making up some new poses so they can be special. So there's a lot of what I would call disconnected movements that are not connected to the understanding of anatomy and how the body really moves and rebuilds. So what happens with that, the danger with that, is that people get too loose in their lower back or too loose in their hips, and they lose stability. And when we're moving quickly in poses, we can't notice which muscles are working more and which ones are working less. So we lose our ability to discriminate. And when you're talking about healing your back pain, we want to discriminate. Where is my strength and where is my weakness? And how do I level the scales between strength and weakness using anatomical principles as applied to yoga? Yeah. Does that kind of help with that question?
Of course. Now, as you and I know, Lillah, there's all different kinds of bodies. Some of us are super flexible. We're the ones who become yoga teachers, and other people are really naturally tight. How can a person know what kind of yoga is best for their body?
You know, I cannot answer that question because there's so many ways to apply yoga. You got to remember, the image of yoga, it's the tree of yoga. It's got thousands of branches. It's got so many ways it can be applied. So that's really, a person has to step out and just try something, right? Or they have to look and say, is this a yoga class for people over 50? Mm-hmm. Is this a yoga class to address back care and back pain? What kind of yoga class is it? And hopefully where people enter in, they start getting some relief and recognizing the value of yoga for their life, that then it spills over and gives that other change for them, and then they can, you know, find their way with yoga into themselves.
Now, Lillah Schwartz, when pain arises during a yoga pose, so a person's in a yoga class, they're doing yoga, and all of a sudden they notice, I don't feel good, I'm hurting. How should that person respond?
Well, you know, pain is an indicator. Pain is the way our body communicates with the mind, because it doesn't have language. The language is sensation or pain. That's how the body communicates to the heart and the mind. So if you're in a yoga class and you're in a pose and you feel a pain, you got to back off. You know, I tell my students when they're in my class under my guidance, I say to them, on a scale of 1 to 10 again, you want to feel the stretch at a maybe a 4, 5, or 6. If you're only feeling like a sensation of stretching at a 1 or a 2, it's probably not helping you very much, because we're trying to loosen things up in very specific ways, right? So somebody's hamstrings might be the shortest muscle, or somebody's quadriceps might be the shortest muscle. And so they've got to get in there and do a little bit of stretching. So the guidance usually is to go 4, 5, or 6. If the pain level goes up to a 7 or 8, back off. Back down, come back down to the pose, regroup, think about it, try again. If it keeps happening over and over again in one particular pose, then the pose is wrong. So somehow you've collapsed in a joint that was already, the connective tissue was already a little weak, and you've collapsed and compressed a joint, and your body's telling you by giving you a pain signal.
Right. And
So
I'm always saying, you know, short, sharp shooting pain is bad. Because then if you have a short, sharp shooting pain, you've hit a nerve. So you totally want to avoid that.
yes.
Now, Lillah Schwartz, how can a practitioner avoid re-injuring their back?
Catherine, before I go to that question, I'm going to add part B to the previous question, because there's a formula that's really useful and can be applied over and over again. When you get into a deep stretch, or any stretch, and you go, oh, I'm definitely at a 6 or a 7 right now, I can really feel that. And the mind wants to go, oh, that hurts, I'm going to run away. Right? That's what the mind does in survival. It's going to run away. And when we get to that point, you got to stay in the pose. You got to stay in the pose for 3 to 7 breaths. So what we do, the formula is, and this is also borrowed from the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn, with his work with Full Catastrophe Living, the book that he wrote originally many years ago, that's still going to be really helpful to people these days. And that is, you stop, you suspend judgment, you breathe, and you wait. Because in that waiting phase, the body's going to recalibrate, and it's going to go, oh, this person, this soul, this person who lives in this body is asking me to reprogram this. Oh, I'm going to see what I can do to accommodate the request. So my experience of having a body is that it's a loyal friend. And everything I ask my body to do, it does. Whether it's a positive thing I'm asking it to do or a negative thing, it's going to do it. Whether I have a healing result or I have a different result, the body's doing what I ask it to do. So we have to be kind. We have to learn to be kind and suspend judgment and just be really mindful and present when we're stretching. And then follow the formula. This hurts. Why does it hurt? Let me stop. Let me suspend judgment. Let me breathe and think about it. Okay, and what I do when I get to that point I'm thinking about it, I ask myself, do I have proper joint alignment? Because if I don't have proper joint alignment, I'm not going to push through that at all. I'm going to really back off. But maybe I can just tweak like the position of my pelvis, right? Tweak it a little bit, balance it, and that lessens the discomfort. Or maybe I can just extend my knee a little bit more and reach just a little further, and then the energy moves and the discomfort diminishes as well. Distributing the force over through the limbs. So there's a lot to yoga, and people could study it for a really long time to find the results. And that's really why I wrote my book, and I'm just going to say that because 25, 35 years of teaching back care, I narrowed down to 22 simple sequences that people can follow that will help them, that they can rely upon because they're anatomically balanced.
Now, Lillah Schwartz, what is the pelvic clock, and how can positioning our pelvic clock allow us to avoid re-injuring our back?
So the pelvic clock it's the original Pilates clock, and I'm going to back up my chair and stand up for just a second. So the navel is going to be 12 o'clock, and then the one hip is 3, the other hip bone is 9, and the pubic bone, the groins, are 6 o'clock. So you want to look when you're standing that you balance the front of that clock face. So you don't want 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock tipping, nor do you want overly tipping 6 o'clock back or overly tipping 12 o'clock back. Now, what happens when people are doing yoga and laying on the floor, they've been told to press their lower back into the floor. And they really shouldn't do that, because when they're doing that, they're erasing their lumbar curve, and they're actually contributing to idiopathic back pain because they're making their lower back get weak. The other thing that people do when they're on the floor and stretch their legs, and why do I say on the floor? Because the floor is a great feedback mechanism. And if you're standing up and you're grabbing your big toe and lifting your leg up into the air, your pelvis has got to shift to keep you from falling over. Now, if you've already got an injury in your lower back, which people do, first of all, that's not a recommended pose because you're too unstable. And you cannot balance your clock face in those kinds of positions. They're too extreme. So when we lay on the floor, we can feel where the pelvis is. And so when we take a strap and do strap work, take the leg up with a belt around the foot and stretch the hamstring, lying flat on the floor. It's a basic pose, Supta Padangusthasana. You want to look at your clock face is balanced. When we take the leg up, it's natural for the hip to follow like that, because it's a tensegrity system. But if you've got a herniated disc and that hip follows, you've just pinched that nerve.
Right. And for our audience, I'm going to explain a little bit further about the position of the clock face. So one of the people that I studied with over the years is Paul Chek. And in the Chek system, part of what you do is you literally measure the spinal curvatures. Now, your spine ideally is supposed to be an S curve. When your lumbar curve, first of all, your lower back is the width of one of your hands. And your lower back, your lumbar curve, supports 2/3 of your body weight. So let's say, for the sake of ease, that you weigh 150 pounds. That means that there's 100 pounds of pressure on that lower back. Now, if your lumbar curve is less than 30 degrees, then there's compression. So part of what we want to do is restore the natural curve in the lumbar spine.
Right.
Okay. And because if your lower back is too flat, those discs compress. And when the discs compress, it literally pinches on the nerves. And, it's so easy for people like Lillah and myself to help people get out of back pain. You observe the person. Also, there will be locking up from the sacroiliac joint, right? So that joint at L5S1. And then while I'm talking about the curve in the spine, if the upper back is greater than 35 degrees, AKA slumping, then, that's going to cause all kinds of upper back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain. So again, the position of your spine and this position of your spinal curvatures can be restored through a healthy yoga practice and a balanced yoga practice.
And what I want to say about that, Catherine, let's stay with that. So the practical piece is that when somebody's lying on the floor and they want to get to know where their pelvic clock is, say they can't run to another professional, they're somewhere, God knows we've all been on lockdown, right? And so you get on the floor and you just measure, you touch with your hand. So if you touch on one side, your waist is short, that hip has come up. So you measure, this side's long, this side's short. Oh, I think it's like that all the time. So that is an indicator of your anatomical imbalance in your pelvis. And so when you're doing things like floor stretches, the hip series, opening up the hips in a balanced way, the focus is to keep the clock face stable. And then we want to translate that to the standing poses in yoga as well, so that you're not letting your hips jump one way or the other. So that work is to keep that balance and work with a balanced clock face as much as possible. Right.
Right. And one of the easiest ways that people throw their pelvis and lower back out of balance is by crossing their legs when they're sitting, right? So even now as I'm talking to Lillah, I'm like, oh my goodness, am I sitting up as straight as possible? Because most of us go unconscious when we sit down. We focus on what we're doing and we forget about our body.
That's true.
Lillah Schwartz, what is reciprocal inhibition and how can it help us, understanding this principle, get us out of pain?
So learning to stretch is really a dynamic act. So, I have to talk about more than just reciprocal inhibition, because right now, most yoga teachers don't use it. They flow and they big extensions, just stretch everything out, keep stretching, hold the poses, yin yoga, get in a position, stay there for 5 or 10 minutes, let all the connective tissue stretch. And there's no reciprocal inhibition going on. There's just stretching, softening going on. And my caution with that, I do have a caution with that, and that is if the alignment isn't quite right. I've seen people injure themselves by staying in poses passively too long. And so that's where my teacher and the Iyengar method was very specific about how the body was supported in restorative poses, right? And he had 4 or 5 main ones that he used all the time. He didn't do every single pose in that way necessarily. But reciprocal inhibition, so that's one side of it. The other side of it is to get the neurological pulsation into the body. So one of the ways we restore our system is to walk, right? Is to pulsate and to walk. And I recommend that along with the yoga practice. That's my practice. I've got meditation, pranayama, asana practice, and walking. Those are the ways I keep myself in balance. So when we're using reciprocal inhibition, it means that one muscle group is contracting, which naturally lets the opposite muscle group release. So it's something that's hardwired into the system. It's part of the loop. It's part of how the body moves through space. So when we're walking, for example, when the quadricep contracts to pick our leg up, the hamstring starts to let go. And then there are shades, many shades of gray along that journey. So in a yoga pose, we want to activate the body with reciprocal inhibitions. For example, simple example, I have some back pain. I've been sitting at the desk for a while. I have some back pain. I'm going to lay down on the floor. I'm going to bring an alternated chest, and then I'm going to do what? I'm going to do some stomach curls. Not big ones. I'm just going to do some curls. I'm going to curl. I'm going to contract the abdomen, contract the front body, and what it's going to do is relieve the spasms at the back body, right? And then at some point, and so that's reciprocal inhibition in action, right? In order to restore 2 things, we've got the psoas muscle and the quadricep muscles on the front, which are very powerful and very strong. And we accentuate that strength and that power when we sit a lot. And the lower back muscles are weaker, and the hamstring muscle is mostly a tendon, not a lot of muscle, and they can't really overcome the shortness in the front body. So it's a combination. When we talk about bringing the body to balance so the spine is healthier, there has to be some release in the front and some tone in the back. And that's something I observe, especially in people as we're aging. So I'm aging. I'm in my late 60s, and I have students anywhere from age 50 to 77, right? Is that the front body tends to get more dense, more strong, shorter, and that has to be released. So those baby back bends like Virabhadrasana 1 or simple lunging poses that help to open the front body, followed by something like Shalabhasana locust pose to actually tone the back body and restore the curve, restore and heal the micro tears in the fascia, make the fascia stronger, build bone density because strengthening those muscles drives the impulses into the bones to help the bones stay strong. So it's really important to balance the front and back body, is where I ended up with that little rant I just did.
Now, Lillah Schwartz, what is the principle of pairs of opposites? And how can we use the principle of pairs of opposites to heal back pain?
So pairs of opposites. So it's such a great question. I should probably do a short video series and a blog about it, because it is so not understood in yoga. It is so not understood. So a pair of opposites in essence means that every action that we take in one direction has to have a counter action or a counterpoint in the other direction. So I don't want to just press my rear heel down into the floor in Virabhadrasana 1. I also want to lift the bottom of my belly. Because if I just push that thigh back and press the heel down, my belly is going to spill out and go forward. Why? Because the quad and the psoas is shorter, and it's going to pull the pelvis with it. But then I've lost my clock face. So then I have to back up, shorten my stride, press the rear heel down, straighten the knee, lift the bottom of my belly, and then what do I feel? Oh, I feel extension now in the quad and the psoas, because I have that counterpoint, that opposite action of the lift of the belly to balance the pressing down of the heel. So that's the essence of it.
Right. And Lillah Schwartz, what is our pelvic floor, and how can strengthening our pelvic floor help us to alleviate and also prevent back pain?
So there's two levels of that, Catherine. There's the perineal level, right?
And will you explain for our audience where that is geographically?
Okay. So imagine a kite shape like this, and my fingertips are my pubic bone, and my thumbs are my tailbone. And if I put that down in the center of my pelvis, the part of the pelvis that faces the earth, and that's going to be your perineal area, the perineal muscles. So there's a lot of in-depth study about the perineum. Is it too short and tight, or is it loose and weak? And as we know, the door swings both ways. It could go either way depending on the person. So if it's really short and contracted, somebody might have painful intercourse. Right? There's those aspects. More often when we have wobbly hips, and yoga does give us wobbly hips, unfortunately, that's the downside, is not enough toning in the yoga, most yoga practices. So with those wobbly hips, then the pelvic floor gets a little uneven, or if somebody has a scoliosis, or they've had a pelvic injury like myself, falling on their tailbone and shifting, then one side will be tight and the other side will be loose. So there can be a lot of variations onto how that plays out. So that's the pelvic floor aspect of it. But the controller of the pelvic floor is really the transverse abdominis. And the transverse abdominis is the deepest layer of abdominal muscles. It wraps around the whole belly like a girdle. It's the girdle muscle. It's the first one that holds the organs in place and keeps them from falling out. Unfortunately, when we do a lot of sitting, the lower abdominals get very weak. So when I first ask somebody to draw the bottom of their belly in and up in a yoga pose, they don't know what that means. And the way to find your transverse abdominis, because I did do a blog about this one, the way to find your transverse abdominis when lying on the floor, put your fingertips on your lower belly and breathe normally. And when you breathe normally, you observe that the lower abdomen expands as you inhale and relaxes and drops as you exhale. And then you repeat, and you repeat that several times until that feels like, oh yeah, that's a real natural breath. I can feel that natural breath into my belly. And then you start to engage the muscle by making that sound, that psst, right? And when you do this, you inhale, and then you exhale, and you go psst, and you feel with your hands, and you feel how that muscle contracts. And so you're beginning to engage the transverse abdominis, which is something you're really going to need to not only support your lower back, but also to stabilize the SI joints side to side. So that's the beginning. And then when we make that sound, we're also engaging some of the deeper fibers of the pelvic floor and the perineum. And then we can use that awareness of how to engage the transverse abdominis when we come to standing and do other things.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been my fellow yoga teacher, Lillah Schwartz. You can find out more about Lillah Schwartz and her book, Healing Our Backs with Yoga, on yogawithlillah.com. And remember, you can heal your back naturally with yoga, and it's very possible. And as you practice yoga regularly in an intelligent way, you can keep yourself out of back pain forever. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.